Pleased to welcome Kristine Gloria, Director of Artificial Intelligence at Aspen Digital, to moderate this important panel discussion today. Our panelists include Dr. Emily Weinstein, Senior Researcher at Harvard Project Zero, Iretiolu, Akinrinade, and Joan Mukogosi, Research Assistants at Data and Society, Vaishnavi J, Head of Safety and Wellbeing at Instagram, and Ayman Hariri, Co-founder and CEO of VERO. While we will not have time for live Q&A today, we do welcome you to use the chat respectfully with any questions that we might be able to get to our panelists afterwards and catch up with you all after via email or through our website. Thank you all for being here, and Kristine, I will turn it over to you.
Amazing. Thank you, Jillian, for such a warm welcome. Hi, everybody. As Jillian mentioned, I'm Kristine Gloria, Director of Artificial Intelligence with Aspen Digital, a public policy program of the Aspen Institute. Our work centers on empowering industry, academics, researchers, lawmakers, and other members of civil society to be responsible stewards of technology. And I am delighted to make space for and share in this discussion with all of you today. As Jillian mentioned, the conversation today, we're going to explore this intersection of youth, well-being, and technology. And I think we all recognize that to some degree, our mediated digital interactions have an effect, good or bad, on our mental and emotional well-being. And I recognize there has been a lot of attention in the news lately about this, and trust me, we will get there. But I really kind of wanted to start off by by laying down some groundwork with this wonderful set of experts we have available at our disclosure. I think one thing to note is, the research in this space indicates this relationship between technology and youth to be, well, complicated, right? Pew has released numbers over the past couple of years where 81% of teens say that social media makes them feel more connected to what's going on in their lives. And then on the opposite end, 45% say they feel overwhelmed by the drama that they encounter in social media. So I think there is a lot of questions here that we'd like to unpack. And I really want to kind of start off with Emily over with Project Zero, who's been studying this space for a while, and just would like to hear your thoughts on, how do youth perceive their connection with technology, and to what extent does that impact their relationship to it?
Thanks, Kristine. And I really appreciate the Pew data that you just referenced to tee up our conversation. My team at Project Zero recently finished analyzing some of our own data from over 3,600 youth on their perspectives and worries about growing up with today's technologies. And one of our most important findings is that teens aren't monolithic and their tech experiences don't happen in a vacuum. We all know this, but it's just so important that youth have different strengths and vulnerabilities and circumstances, and their experiences with tech differ in really important ways as a result. So practically 1 hour on Discord may directly support feelings of connectedness for a teen who feels isolated at school, but uses tech to stay close with his camp friends or cousins. And for another teen, an hour on the exact same platform may be filled with name calling from supposed friends that leads to feeling inadequate and isolated. And it's not just either or, like tech is either making a teen feel connected or it's making that teen feel isolated. It can be both at different moments. And I think because it varies by teens and for individual teens, we found there's just so much power in starting by asking teens open-ended, pretty simple questions like, when does tech make you feel most connected? And when does it make you feel most lonely? Which really intentionally open up more nuanced conversations and create space for them to actually share the good and the bad with us.
That's great, Emily. I think it's wonderful to kind of hear that there's complexity here, because I think so much of what we do, particularly from the science realm, probably flattens a lot of that. And into that, I would love to hear from Iretiolu and Joan, who have really spent some time here figuring out the nuances of this relationship. And specifically, the work that you guys have produced, what are some of the hot takes that you would give to developers and lawmakers that really need to understand this relationship and this nuance? How would you approach that with them?
So thank you for that question. And I will say we're so happy to be here, so grateful to have this opportunity to talk about our work. And I will say first to sort of build on this sort of idea of complexity that teens have with their relationship to technology. In our Unseen Teen report, we saw that young people definitely define their experience with technology in a number of different ways. And one of our respondents talked about their experience speaking with a young person about their digital well-being, and the young person basically said that there's no such thing as digital well-being, that it's really just their well-being in general as a whole. And so we might imagine digital well-being to be something that describes our relationship with technology. But teens actually view the line between their virtual and non-virtual world as really blurred and sort of porous. And so just to say, this is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to define and operationalize concepts like well-being for and connection for teens online. And I think that's something important to hold when working on this topic.
Thanks, Joan. Iretiolu, do you have any additional thoughts you'd like to add into that?
I do. I want to make sure that we get to your specific question, but as Joan said, blurred and porous is the perfect way to describe how teens perceive their connection to technology. They have this understanding that their offline emotions impact their online behaviors, and their online behaviors and environments impact their offline experience. But the distinction between the two isn't really important or meaningful because their digital and real lives are just so intertwined. And I understand that we're talking about social isolation or connection, but I think digital well-being as a whole is really relevant here because it's not just your social connection. It's also thinking about digital hygiene. What's your digital footprint? How many tabs do you have open? How do you organize everything that you've consumed and hope to retain? And what we've described and what we're talking about is this practice of strategic, engaging in strategic knowledge, which Joan and I have been working on to understand how teens and people in general's understanding of the platforms impacts the way that they act on the platforms. So these strategies are developed in tandem with their digital environments. So it's particularly important that these platforms don't incentivize or norm unhealthy or harmful ways of connecting.
That's great. And I would like to throw it back to any one of you guys specifically on this. I think as a researcher, or even as someone who is trying to develop a solution in this space, it seems like it's a moving target that could easily be moved in the wrong direction. Curious if there are any general principles that, as you're thinking about this from a teen use perspective, could be helpful in getting them to both come to the realization of, it's more than just my interactions and digital hygiene, it's my footprint, exactly, all the above, whether anything has risen to the top for you guys in your research to provide guidance in that space. Joan?
I was going to say for us to answer, or for
I'm opening it up to your.
Yeah, no. So I think it kind of goes back a bit to what Emily was saying about the fact that teenagers have almost an incomprehensible amount of diverse experiences online, and so we know from, like I said, our report, the Unseen Teen, that tech companies often design their platforms around an imagined average user that tends to be younger, but also male and white. And obviously this ends up marginalizing users whose identities don't fit into this mold. But at the same time, we kind of want to caution tech companies from creating an imagined marginalized user, which is to say that even in communities that are excluded from the norm, that there is a diversity of experience within those communities as well. And so, yes, there's no sort of one size fits all solution. And I guess that's not, a clear answer of how to move forward, but it is a caution that there is no easy solution, that experiences online, like we've been saying, are sort of like influenced by a number of factors that, yes, have to do with how platforms are built and how people experience, you know, how people craft their experiences online, but offline experiences are just as important and need to be valued just as much.
Great, thank you, Joan. Emily or Arati, do you have any additions to that? Yeah, okay, well, I would love to bring in Ayman to this, because as someone who is literally building a platform that is trying to address some of these things, I'd love to hear your perspective on what you as your company and other technology companies should be doing to promote more pro-social connection. How do you get at that well-being if it's so varied? And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your process and your thinking there.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me today, and I really appreciate all the comments that I've heard up to now. I mean, it's just in terms of, you know, everything from being careful not to flatten you know, any problem down to one simple answer, or trying to come up with a silver bullet. There isn't a silver bullet to these things. We sort of have to take a step back and have, you know, humility with what is it that we're doing, and realize just how you know, technology changes. It can be an accelerant to certain things in certain ways, and I certainly don't want to age anyone here. I'm happy to do it myself, but you know, I was born in '78. I was raised and born and raised in Saudi Arabia, so quite disconnected from the rest of the world. I mean, we used to receive things. You know, our access to TV shows used to come in the mail. You know, basically, you used to get VHS tapes that used to show up, and we used to watch them. But and the idea and thinking about how teens grow up with technology today. You know, the old joke: what connects a pencil and a cassette tape? You know, kids today don't know, you know, why you would need a pencil with a cassette tape, and with everyone laughing here, yeah, exactly, you know what I'm talking about. But we're sort of that generation that grew up looking at technology entering the world and changing the world, whereas you know, I look at my teenage son and my daughter and teenage daughter and young son, and how technology is just an extension of them, an extension of how they live. And they can't imagine the world without it. They don't know a world that could possibly not have an iPhone that can connect them with their friends with FaceTime in milliseconds, etc. So there is, I feel, a responsibility to people who have seen technology enter into our world, though. Remember what it was like, remember the fundamentals of social connection, that technology did not need to be a part of our lives in order for us to connect meaningfully with one another. And so the thing that the rule that I prescribe to, that my team and I prescribe to while we're building the product, is remembering that we need to get out of the way as much as possible. We can't be an entity that is part of the conversation. We're an enabler of the conversation. We are an enabler of, you know, what I always say is technology does best when it bridges space and time. Here we are, you know, I'm in Dubai, all of you are in the rest of the world, and here we are talking as if we're in the same room, which growing up was Jetsons technology for us. And as much as we can allow for this kind of interaction, where a platform doesn't have its own agenda, that's based on a business model that wants engagement, that thrives off of it, because it's not sustainable, not in 1-2 years, not in a quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters. Think 10 years, 20 years from now. And so, you know, for us, we're big believers that people know how to talk to each other, how to grow up with each other, and how to make friends, and how to fall in love, and how to, you know, get their hearts broken, etc., like this. We're not inventors of this. Let's, you know, for the whole world, for just people whether it's young people and adults alike, let's let human nature sort of take its course, and let us be, with a lot of humility and care, provide that as our services as a tool for them to be able to, reach the people that they love when they want, and the people in their lives when they can.
Thanks, Ayman. I think that's super powerful to remind ourselves that there are other ways to be doing this, and that we're actually very good inherently of connecting with each other. I am kind of curious, this notion that you brought in about the time in which you can recall that experience of getting the VHS and your relationship with technology. Emily, if you don't mind, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but in the course of the work that you've done, has there been I'm kind of curious of the arc of the change here, right? There are so many more VEROs, clubhouses, discords, like there are just, is the knowledge different, or is it being more sophisticated? What would you say youths, how do the youth language and understanding, if that's changed at all in the last couple of years in the work that you've been doing?
Thanks for that question, Kristine. And I really appreciate all the perspectives that have been raised so far. I think this is maybe an adjacent answer, but one of the things we puzzle over constantly is there any dry land? So often it feels like we do research, and then by the time we're even ready to share findings, the apps have changed or their features have changed. And so maybe I'll just share something that we've found really helpful, which is to really take a developmental lens as we're trying to understand what's going on, and to think about what developmental vulnerabilities are relevant, what developmental sensitivities are at the fore, and what sort of developmental needs kids and teens are trying to fill as they're using these technologies. And that lens is really powerful because it can help us understand why something is so compelling, why something is so painful. We know that for adolescents and for girls especially, their friendships are so closely tied to their sense of self and their sense of well-being. And when we think about then features like a snap map, which might show you that your friends' avatars are all clustered together in one place, and suddenly you see that and you realize that your friends have left you out, have excluded you. The experience of social exclusion is not new. The bad feelings that come along with being left out as an adolescent were not created by technology, but there are all these complicated new kinds of social information that are really important for us to kind of tune into if we want to understand teens' experiences. And that's just one example, but there are so many when we think about like identity development and civic participation. I think in each case, just really taking that developmental lens as sort of the dry land can help us figure out what's going on, and then can help us sort of understand why a feature is either so compelling or in some cases is kind of preying on a developmental impulse or vulnerability.
That's great. I love the dry land because it certainly does feel like that. It's shifting and never having the ability to come up with the right research or finding in time. And I think that pushes us quite nicely into what I'm sure everyone has their mind on at the moment, which I'm going to throw to Vaishnavi here. I think we all know, we've seen the recent articles that show that, negative health impacts that Instagram knew ahead of time, especially about teens and girls, and the implication that the company knew that the product was doing that, and how it was addressed. I'd really love to just give some space here for you to help us understand kind of the situation, the thinking, and the pursuit for IG for kids, given the prior knowledge that you guys had. So want to give that opportunity.
Of course. And first of all, thank you for having me. And it's been really interesting listening to the perspectives of the different people on this panel. I think you've got a real diversity of opinions and thoughts here, which is exactly what we've been trying to do on the Instagram and Facebook side. We're really happy to be doing this type of research. It's really important to us that we look into issues that we're hearing about. We started doing this research a number of years ago because we were hearing from our community anecdotally that these were issues that needed to be studied more. So we started doing the research, but as we were doing the research, a couple of things. One, when we do this research, it's meant to provide our internal teams the directional steer on what types of areas to be investing in and doing more on. A lot of that research has directly led to product interventions and policy changes that we've made over the last few years. But the research is also meant to be, it's meant to be directional. So when we finally published some of the decks, we actually included a number of annotations in there that contextualize the research a little bit more. It was written for a closed door audience that's really familiar with these issues and that kind of could benefit from hearing about the issues in a shorthand. It wasn't meant to be something that was, something that would be published externally and that would be that kind of went through peer review and all those processes that we're all very familiar with. That said, I think the research did have some really important findings. One of the findings, of course, was that on 11 out of the 12 yardsticks that we measured people's satisfaction with Instagram on 11 of those 12 yardsticks, people said that they felt better about their time online because of Instagram. And these were people who were already coming to the platform with some sort of pre-existing inclination to feel bad about themselves. So that is actually a pretty powerful statistic. Now, the one yardstick in which people didn't feel like they felt better about themselves after the time on Instagram was body image. That was for teen girls. And that's exactly the kind of that's exactly the type of finding that has led to a number of product interventions over the last few years. Just at the beginning of this year, we announced a holistic package of remediations to target people who may be struggling with thoughts of eating disorders online. We launched one of the things that we had heard from the research, and not just internal research, but the external research that we do with researchers, as well as the expert feedback that we look to get. One of the things that we heard was that it's really important to offer resources to people when they're in a headspace to receive it. So, you can provide resources or offer people help at various points in their journey online, but you really need to find the right moment where they are most likely to utilize the resource. And so one of the ways in which we did this was to really look at the moment when someone is searching for a term related to eating disorders or related to suicide and self-injury. So as an example, if you were to search, say on Instagram for the term anorexia, before we show you the results, we'll say, hey, do you need help? Or do you need someone to talk to? We've partnered with a number of eating disorder hotlines globally so that we can offer localized resources, so to give them access to a local hotline whom they can reach out to. And we've also developed a series of tips on how to address this issue in that moment of crisis. We did that in partnership with the National Eating Disorders Association. So that's a very kind of tangible example of why we do this research. My biggest hope from, I think, everything that has come out over the last few weeks is that people recognize the importance of doing this research, the importance of companies investing in and being willing to have these difficult conversations. These are not easy conversations to have, and I'm personally very glad that we do this research. It would be a shame if, this was seen by the industry as a reason to not look at the problem at all, or to not actually try and understand what the issue is. And I think in terms of where we go going forward, one of the things that has really come up from the research is that not just the internal research, but we work with our youth advisors, for example. We have a group of advisors we consult with for suicide and self-injury, eating disorders and well-being. One of the things that has come up is that people feeling bad about their time online generally tends to be a combination of three factors. It tends to be a combination of what they're seeing, how often they're seeing it, and I forget who made this point. It may have been Emily or Joan, I apologize, but really like the state of mind that the person was in when they were engaging online. That also plays a significant role. So we're in the process of testing out a few new product features. These were features that we had been working on even prior to the news of these last few weeks. And we're looking at ways to sort of nudge people in their time online. So encouraging them to take a break when they've been just kind of in a doom scroll of content for a long period of time. Or if we see that they've just been spending a lot of time on a particular type of topic, perhaps nudging them to consider another topic as part of their experience. These are tests. I don't know how successful they'll be. I think the people in this call are probably really familiar with our very public testing of hiding likes over the last 2 years and some of the outcomes from that. It is a little scary to do these tests in public, to be honest, but I do think it's the right thing for us to do, and to be able to say, like we did with hiding likes, that actually the results were quite mixed and it didn't actually lead to the types of changes we thought it would lead to. So I hope that that's helpful. Of course, happy to kind of answer more questions as they come up.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I'd like to invite anybody on the panel to also jump in if they have questions. But I think one of the things that is interesting here is that in some ways we're coming into a generation of users and digital experts who can probably navigate whether that nudge is appropriate for them versus whether the organization or the platform should do it on their behalf. I am curious, either from Ayman as the platform creator, or from any of the researchers, whether there is a place here for youth to change that, or to be the leader in being able to say whether or not that's what they want, and how do you make that happen, right? So I think that's a really interesting problem for anyone working in that space. I see Ayman, your mic off if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I want to give the opportunity for others to jump in on the conversation. I mean, I know, it's sort of this situation where if as a platform you're displaying content for somebody in a way that isn't just informative, it isn't just like something that we hold on to quite dearly is a chronological feed, for example, from everybody that you're connected with or that you follow. And so there's nothing in your feed that is coming from anybody that you haven't yourself opted into following and subscribing to, or getting their information, their content, the things that they have to say, the things that they share. So in a situation where you're presented with content that's coming from a platform's sort of decision on whether this content is under a particular heading, a particular subject, etc., then you need to, as a platform, again, sort of balance that out with the kinds of actions that were just described. And that's where it's sort of a slippery slope for us. I mean, we always think, give people the tools and they will figure things out for themselves to be able to to navigate whatever content they're looking for, whatever they're looking, whatever information they're trying to receive. I mean, certainly if they're looking up things that there's very little reason why they'd be looking them up in terms of terms, as was described before, that certainly giving information, extra information that can educate the user and the person, I think that's a good idea. But when it comes to sort of the platform's intervention, well, what was done previously that led to the intervention needing to be made. And so it's sort of looking at the source of that. And for me, I mean, I do, we just try to avoid it completely. So.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. I appreciate that. We have only 5 minutes left, and I feel like that doesn't do this conversation justice, because there's so much more that I'd love to sit here and unpack. I think I'd like to bring back a little bit for the audience, kind of both the expectations that we should have of technology companies and how we should be approaching our relationship with them. As one open question I will allow the group to noodle on, but also to that end, like what could we as either academics, practitioners, parents, teachers, public health officials do to better prepare our youth as they navigate kind of the increasingly connected future? I would love anyone to kind of get at either one of those questions as we wrap up in 4 minutes. So does anyone want to take a quick stab? Yep.
I mean, I have some initial thoughts, and in my role as our head of safety and well-being, I think about this a lot. I think a lot about how to make sure that young people are having safe and healthy experiences online. But I think we also have to be really cognizant that the young people are growing up online, and that the internet and social media is a huge lifeline for them in terms of building connections, forming their identity, learning more about this world that they're in, norms and expectations of the communities that they're in. And so one thing that I kind of think about a lot is, how do we really balance the agency of young people and their rights and the opportunities for them to really discover who they are with the need to keep them safe? Over the last few years, for example, I've been so amazed by the types of young activists who have come up to talk about issues as diverse as, Indigenous land rights, political protests, social issues. How do we make sure that we can build an internet that lets them do all those things in really productive, important ways, while still keeping them safe from, the worst of the worst, as there is with any kind of online platform? That's something that I think about a lot, and I try to kind of get a lot of input from our partners and safety and well-being stakeholders on.
Thank you. I know that you guys do that pretty actively, and I know some of the people on this panel are part of those conversations. I would love to hear from Emily or Joan or Reti, kind of similarly, what are some of the things that we can be doing here, and what are the expectations that we should have as users and or stewards for the youth in their relationship with technology. Joan?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we touched on it a bit before when Iretiolu and I were talking about, cautioning against creating an average marginalized user. But I kind of want to sort of inject into this conversation that young people, regardless of what platforms are doing, how they're changing their strategies and online experiences, they are taking their virtual worlds into their own hands. And that's what strategic knowledge sort of offers, is that proof that young people are actively shaping platforms to fit their needs independently, and in some cases, like in spite of what tech companies are doing. I think of like, if your mom tells you to clean your room and you're already going to clean your room, but now that she told you to do it, you don't want to do it anymore. I think that that's an important element to consider here. And so I think in terms of like our expectations, I think that knowing that teenagers, that young people are, always going to be finding new ways to sort of subvert and manipulate platforms to make them fit their needs, that platforms should focus instead on, examining their own flaws and biases before, imposing them onto us and passing the responsibility to create meaningful connections onto the most vulnerable members of our society, right? So knowing and keeping young people and their, activism as central to their experience, I think is important here, but also not sort of in turn putting that responsibility back on them to make their to sort of also like tell us what their problems are, but also to make their virtual experiences better.
That's great, Joan. I could not ask for a better way to bring this home, and you're getting some enthusiastic reactions in chat. So I think that's a wonderful space for us to leave. I think, you know, again, there's so much in this intersection that we could spend lots and lots of time of. And I really, you know, encourage anyone out there who's listening, if you're interested, to please reach out to all of us. I think you could probably find our profiles online and to engage, because this is certainly one of those spaces that requires a lot of different perspectives for us to get a better handle on how it all works. So with that, I thank you, all of you, for your time. It's too quick, and I'll send it back over to our friends over at the coalition.